Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying!
Yes, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cannon Podcast. We are back with another youth spotlight, and I'm here with my boy, Will. How are you doing, Will?
I'm fantastic. How are you, George?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. It was nice to talk. I think we got into some pretty cool topics. I'd really encourage everybody, if you guys do like these little youth pod updates, to have like a little look at kind of the more longer versions that we release on Patreon, which you can find in a link down below. We kind of went through a lot of topics, a smattering of them really, like looking at the league position table of U18s and the U21s, kind of describing maybe where the difference is between there and some of the talents we see. We touched on the recent cup game with the youth, in which Max Dowman surprised and startled and dazzled really in his performance down there. And of course, to end, we did have a little bit of a talk about youth recruitment strategies in terms of Youth Gabriel, what the impact is of Miles Lewis-Skelly and Ethan Waneri, what they're doing in the team, and how maybe Mikel Arteta's youth management deserves some maybe rightful praise this season. And, there's some valid previous concerns, but we got to be fair in terms of his integration steps that he's taken this year. And then to round off, we talked about the person that we're going to be doing the youth spotlight on today, and that is Dan Casey, a very underrated player that I feel is an exciting one to talk about, because he's probably I made the comparison on the pod, he's got that Alex Iwobi pathway. So we're not talking about the same player, but we're talking about a player who maybe there's other talents that are more exciting within the class, but this is a guy that works incredibly hard, maximizes what he learns, and really takes what the coaches go on, because as far as improvement goes, year on year, Dan Casey is a player that has taken massive strides in terms of really adapting to each level, changing his game, and adding to it in a way that I think very few talents do. First off, maybe you can give the people a little bit of a breakdown on Dan Casey, some of the pros, the cons, and a player that he reminds you of.
Definitely. Dan Casey is a true attacking midfielder, and not in the creative sense, but this is a player who absolutely loves to get on the ball in and around the edge of the box and is not shy to try and score goals. And his ball striking technique is awesome. It's really, really cool and different. It's not the kind where he's going to slather through the ball and, destroy the back of the net, but his precision and the ability to kind of tuck it around players into corners, into the roof of the net, whatever it may be, is amazing. And he's shown it by adding 14 goals and 2 assists for the under-18s this year in 15 matches. And this is a midfielder. He's been asked, though, to play quite a bit as a number 9, as a false 9, all over the place and through the center of the park, though, every single time, because this is a player whose impact comes from getting on to the ball. He is really, really good at making those third runs. He likes to run off the ball really well. I do struggle a little bit when he goes a little bit deeper, and we saw it in that FA Youth Cup match. He's not great at winning duels. His tackling technique is not one of the best, and it's not unexpected, but he is a big body. You'd like to see him get a little bit better into those duels, win the ball back in the middle of the park, and kind of spring the team forward. But to talk about somebody he reminds me of, he really reminds me of the way Aaron Ramsey loved to get on the ball in and around the box and score goals. Just always pop up in the right place, never shy away from taking that shot on net, even from a tough angle or with players in front of him, just because he always backed himself to score. And Dan Casey is the same way. He's really, really somebody who believes in himself and believes in his work ethic. And every time he's been asked to play a different role or come into a side, come into a match, he applies himself. And he is a coach's true dream of a player and a top mentality at that, and someone who I've enjoyed really growing over the last 18 months from when he made his under-18s debut and up till now, where he's starting to get an under-21s opportunity. So he's definitely an interesting player, an underrated talent, and one to keep an eye on over the next year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a talent. Like you said, he really reminds me of Aaron Ramsey in the way that he attacks space. Right? Like he's somebody that is kind of that third midfielder that maybe doesn't have as much influence in possession on the ball as you would hope at this current moment, even though I think Aaron maybe had a lot more potential to do that, especially earlier in his career. But Dan Casey's in a similar mold where he comes alive in terms of attacking space. The third man runs, the finding the space in the final third, and then also finishing, the composure to which he's able to finish chances is truly amazing. Like most of his goals are side foot finish, bottom corner. He doesn't make them look flashy. It's efficiency, like personified. And it's somebody that I think is very calm in those situations, which is actually quite rare. And when you have a look at his frame, this is something that I would hope that maybe he looks to. And we mentioned it on the pod as well. I have a feeling like you should really look at Frank Lampard as a kind of mentor to the type of player that he could do. Really have a look at Joe Willock in terms of who was in that mold in the academy, but then developed a lot more ability on the dribble in terms of breaking teams out of pressure. Like when we're in our first phase, especially when you're looking to transition to adult football, you need to be a little bit more than a master of the third man run. You need to influence things a bit more in possession to really have a chance of making an impact at the first team. And I think he's got the ability to, where he's almost shy and reserved in possession, but then explodes out of possession, and he becomes a totally different personality. Then there is a tendency for him to maybe be swallowed up by the game in possession, where he does drop deep and maybe he doesn't exert the influence that I think he does have as a potential, especially because when you look at his pace of pass in finding players between the lines and when he's found in positions to release, it's actually very good. He spots passes well. The tempo of his pass is really nice. I think that when he's on the dribble, he keeps the ball close to him. Nothing is a wasted touch, and he does make very good decisions in transition. I think that's one of his strong suits. I think as far as being a player that can really influence things against a low block or a mid block, that's a development pathway that I think he maybe needs to have a little bit more work on. But again, having a look at Frank Lampard as kind of an inspirational idea, or even a Joe Willock in terms of you now impacting yourself in the carry, especially in possession, is something that I think as a development path he could look towards. I'll kind of ask you really quickly as far as Dan Casey goes. This is a player that you were mentioning has how many goals and assists in
14
in
and 2 in
season?
15 matches.
Yeah, 14 goals and 2 assists in 15 matches, right? It's objectively great as far as the impact goes. So I just want to start there. Like, as much as he's an underrated talent, I think people don't understand, like, his output to game ratio is incredible for that U18 level that he's doing. And I wanted to maybe get your impact on where you see his development best used, how you see him maybe integrating with the first team, if that's a talent that we can, and maybe where do you see, again, we can't limit talent, but where do you see his ultimate ceiling ending up in? Yeah,
I mean, listen, he'll probably finish out this year bouncing into the under 21s, but I think he'll mostly stay with the under 18s just because of bodies. Mostly, I don't think it's really a talent thing. It's not a player who they're going to push forward like a Dalman or an Ethan, where they're going to keep pushing and pushing. Right now, the 18s need his body. The 21s kind of have a few too many midfielders who are probably too old to be playing there, or not the right fit, or kind of these fringy players. But finishing out the season there is the right thing. Next year, I'd like to see him, probably spend the whole year with the under 21s. You and I mentioned maybe if he really hits the ground exploding, they look at a loan in January, but he needs to play with the under 21s, and he needs to play in a 3-man midfield and actually, contribute more in the deeper part of the areas. He needs to contribute more in breaking the press and in running with the ball and in releasing players ahead of him, and then obviously attacking space the way he does so well. Then I'd like to look at a loan, and you and I talk a lot about specifically where the loan may be best, and we do like the things we've set up in the Eredivisie and with Sturm Graz, obviously. But I actually think it's a player who could really benefit from being in the physicality of League One or the Championship here in England, to kind of grow in those areas. I think technically he doesn't need those leagues with a little bit more space. He actually probably needs the opposite in order to grow as a player. And listen, I'm not going to say this is a player who is going to be a nailed-on starter at Arsenal at any point, but a player who gets on the ball, who can score goals. There's going to be room for that in a squad when he's a player who, number one, is very coachable, always applies himself in whatever area he's asked to compete in, and scores goals come from kind of areas you don't expect goals to get scored from. So if the progression continues the way it has, I think it would be, hard on the player to say he doesn't have a chance at becoming a squad player at Arsenal. And this is a guy who scores goals from midfield, and that's a thing we're always going to need. Yeah,
this is my dark horse kind of player. This is a player that I think for me has potential to really be something that maybe you didn't predict, just because of his sheer learning capacity and the way that he takes on information year on year, improving. It's been a really impressive rise, and he's somebody that always takes comments to evolve his game. And I think when you've got a mindset like that, you've really got a chance, especially in first team football. Then you combine it with really that superstar quality that he's really mastered the third man run, and then the composure of finish is really, really top. I mean, the idea that he's played as a false nine and striker is because he's so good at finishing, where really he is a midfielder by trade. Like, we're talking about a 3-man midfield that he's the third, that's maybe the one that attacks space, right? Like, that's his profile, but we've used him as a false nine and in striker positions. Why? Because he's got the frame of a striker, by the way, really tall player, long legs. And that's why I think you've got some extra capacity to impact here in terms of not just your duels, which you can improve your technique in a little bit, but also in terms of that carrying capacity with the ball breaking out of pressure. Because I think this is a guy that actually works really well with a noose as a partnership.
Yes.
Just in theory, like a noose is somebody as a striker who likes to drop deep, super technical, and then explode into space. But Dan Casey can explode into the space that, a noose vacates. And I think that for me, I'm looking at next year and I'm thinking, wow, that's like a strike partnership that I feel that year could be very exciting for the two of them. Their profiles really complement each other in terms of the way that they like to play the game, the both of them. And I think that could be a front two that's actually quite scary in terms of the work rate, the potential, the frame, the physicality, and the finishing ability of both of those two. They really complement each other. So I'm hoping maybe in the U21s we see a little bit more sample of that happening between those two, specifically striking up a partnership that I feel could be like pretty fruitful. But yeah, it's a player that I think generally speaking, it's going to be exciting to watch him grow. It's somebody that I'm keeping my eye on. I think he is somebody that hasn't been spoken about enough in terms of the greater football fraternity, at least of what I see on X. And I think it's somebody for everybody to keep a close eye on that is maybe not like superstar eye-catching, but is just ruthlessly efficient, that does display a lot of improvement year on year, that you wouldn't be surprised has an impact on the first team, whether that means us selling him for some fairly decent profit or becoming a surprise depth option that can maybe work himself into contention, given the way that he's able to improve and take things on. So yeah, Dan Casey is a player that I really like. I really like as a mentality. And I think I'll end on this. Putting my coaching hat on, I have a look at Dan Casey and I say, oh, I could do some work with you. I could really help you realize some potential, because I feel like you're going to really take on a lot of the advice and the help that I might have to try to get you to realize your potential. But yeah, mate, so that kind of wraps up Dan Casey. Any last words from yourself?
No, I think that perfectly explains the player, and it's, underrated, works as a frame of mind, but also just, I think we always talk about the Ethans and Miles and Maxes of the world, but for every Ethan, Miles, and Max, there's hundreds of players who work relentlessly their entire lives to get to the point where Dan Casey is. And he's already a success in his own right. And I'm excited to see him try and succeed at the next level and the next level. And this is a good player to look at in terms of the way that the overall youth system is kind of designed to work. And just watching his progression is a very normal and exciting progression nonetheless. And hopefully it continues to grow, because as you said, he's someone who applies himself every time he's asked to, and he's very coachable, and he wants to improve in the areas that he needs to. And he has, as the last year has gone on, as we see with his goal return this year.
Yeah, top output and like really taking the next step. So let's see how he does in terms of transitioning to U21s. And again, guys, if you really like that and you liked kind of these spotlights, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Of course, put down who you would like us to maybe spotlight next. If you guys have got a suggestion, we're very much open to that. And of course, please go and check the recent podcasts when you have a look at our Patreon with the link down below, in which again, we talked about Ethan Winery, Miles' impact, and kind of the whole Mikel Arteta youth integration topic again, whether that's been good, bad, the ugly. We also had a real big talk about the recent FA Cup youth match, in which Max Dowman did a brilliant job. And of course, this whole podcast has been talking a little bit more about us youth spotlight and Dan Casey. So if you want to have a little bit more of an idea about what some video taught us, then you can have a little bit of a jump and a look through there. But otherwise, thank you, Will, for all of your help as always.
Of course, always fun to chat.
And thank you guys for sticking with us. And thanks for keeping it Arsenal.